Junior of Osan Air Base. Staff Sergeant Brown is a gold medal winner in the Electronic Security Command's 1984 COM-FI Olympics.
This is AFKN,
your satellite network.
Primary, volcano, concert, riot, religion, hostage, candidate, government, business, merge, refugee, airplane crash, earthquake, celebrity, science, the earth, the universe, the news channel.
Just 2 days before the election, a new poll shows President Reagan maintaining his big lead over Walter Mondale. 57% of those surveyed in the Washington Post ABC poll favor Mr. Reagan, with 39% backing Mondale. That 18-point lead by the president is the same found in the previous Washington Post ABC poll. The Post says its findings indicate Mondale can only count on winning the District of Columbia and may even lose his home state of Minnesota. The newspaper also reports in its analysis of the results that Mr. Reagan could double the margin of his victory over Jimmy Carter. President Reagan certainly isn't stopping to rest this weekend despite the polls. With only 2 days to go before voting day, Mr. Reagan is hitting several issues of dispute with his challenger. CNN's Pam Olson reports.
It had been a tough day for the president. When he was greeted by Mrs. Reagan in Wisconsin, he seemed relieved the day was almost over. Reporters on board Air Force One had been told the president would receive the investigation of the CIA manual early next week, but there were no promises to release publicly all of the report. Deputy White House Press Secretary Larry Speake said Reagan would act on it a day or two after receiving it. It was in Winterset, Iowa, earlier in the day while visiting the late actor John Wayne's birthplace that Mr. Reagan decided to try to clear up some of the thorniest issues facing him in the final days of his re-election campaign. He denied suppressing any findings of any CIA investigation.
And I think it was all a great big scare. There was nothing in that manual that had anything to do with assassinations.
Mr. Reagan was in Iowa trying to increase support in what his own aides describe as a dead-even race. Protesters there demonstrated against his policies, and Mr. Reagan blasted former Secretary of Agriculture Robert Berglund for characterizing the impact of the Carter-imposed grain embargo as a fairy tale.
Well, if they think that embargo was a fairy tale, let them come to Iowa. Let them go to Illinois and Missouri and Ohio, Kansas, and the rest of America to see how farm families have had to struggle to recover from that fairy tale. The only thing that embargo was to fill up your bins and empty your wallets.
In Milwaukee, the president and first lady toured a retirement center, and once again, the president went on the defensive.
The most disturbing part of the election campaign, the eagerness of some for political purposes to demagogue on the issue, actually, of Social Security. And it really leaves me steaming.
In Little Rock, Arkansas, Mr. Reagan hotly denied that he's considering a tax reform plan that would eliminate many popular deductions.
And any of those rumors suddenly that are being floated around desperately in these last couple of days about some suspected tax increases from our side over my dead body.
Campaign officials are confident of a major victory on Tuesday. Nevertheless, they intend to spend the next 2 days campaigning intensively in at least 6 cities to assure a big victory. Hamilton, CNN Election Watch with the Reagan re-election campaign, Milwaukee.
And Democratic challenger Walter Mondale is doing his own barnstorming this weekend. Campaigning in Michigan yesterday, Mondale predicted one of the big surprises of modern history when he defeats Reagan on Tuesday. Mondale stopped outside Detroit to criticize Mr. Reagan's stand on the auto industry. Mondale said the president talks a good game about trade and taxes, but it's all talk and no jobs.
Today, I favor legislation that tells foreign auto manufacturers to produce domestic content here in the United States so we can have American jobs, an American future for American workers and their families. Mr. Reagan opposes that.
Mondale plans to crisscross the country today, visiting Tennessee, Texas, Iowa, and California. Vice President George Bush faced the worst organized heckling of his campaign in Pennsylvania yesterday. Still, the confident vice president told the crowd he was sure of a landslide victory for the Republican incumbents. Officials say Pennsylvania is one of 4 states in which President Reagan is only narrowly ahead of Walter Mondale. The others are Hawaii, Iowa, and Minnesota. Bush urged everyone to go to the polls on Tuesday, taking no chances despite poll predictions of a possible 50-state sweep for the president. In the meantime, vice presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro continues to throw punches at President Reagan into the final stretch of the campaign. From Wisconsin, CNN's Trinette Ledford has more.
The home stretch of Geraldine Ferraro's bid for vice president has the candidate tired but still fighting. Her swings at Ronald Reagan are as strong as they've ever been, especially when telling voters that the president will raise taxes if he's reelected, even though he's denied it.
Yesterday, we found out the truth from a leak out of the Treasury Department, and that leak told us that this president, Ronald Reagan, is planning to make every low and middle-income family pay more taxes so that corporations can keep on paying less.
Although the economy, specifically taxes, has remained high on the list of grievances against the Republicans, Ferraro has seized a more recent issue to attack President Reagan. The CIA's role in Nicaragua and the manual that depicts training procedures for guerrillas has been downplayed, according to Ferraro. Referring to his CIA when talking about the president's role, Ferraro said he promised to fire the person responsible for the manual, but to date, no one's lost their job.
Instead, this president's CIA director now says that the murder manual was misunderstood. Its real purpose, he says, and I quote, is to make every guerrilla persuasive in face-to-face communication. Now, since when can you pass off murder as making friends? When did kidnapping become friendly persuasion? And who can confuse terror with peaceful advocacy? I say the American people don't want any more surprises in Central America. It's time to stop the covert war in Nicaragua.
The Democrats have been accused all along of running a bad news campaign based on negative forecasts for the future. But while painting this administration's policies as potentially dangerous, Geraldine Ferraro is trying to turn that negative image around by promising to stop the covert war in Nicaragua and to raise taxes fairly. With the countdown now measured in terms of hours and the Republicans' commanding lead in the polls, any new strategy or any new issue is welcomed by the campaign. Trinette Ledford at CNN Election Watch with the Ferraro campaign, Wisconsin.
Attempts to disrupt today's presidential elections in Nicaragua have left 7 soldiers dead. Reports from the area claim U.S.-backed rebels attacked the soldiers as they were carrying election materials to voter precincts. As Ralph Begleiter reports, the Reagan administration is keeping a very close watch on the results of today's election.
In Nicaragua, the Sandinista government has been campaigning as though its fate were in the balance in the first election since the 1979 revolution, which brought the Marxists to power. But in the eyes of the Reagan administration, Nicaragua's election offers no choice at all to the Nicaraguan people. The main opposition coalition of conservative and democratic parties has refused to take part in the election, charging the ruling junta with disrupting their campaign rallies and preventing access to news media and voters. Junta leader Daniel Ortega has invited international observers to evaluate the election, but the U.S. administration hopes the observers won't legitimize Nicaragua's voting.
The United States is not in favor of a phony or a fake election.
Nicaragua's opposition parties have kept in close touch with the Reagan administration. Arturo Cruz met with Secretary of State Shultz in Washington just a few days before the election. But the administration denies it pressured Cruz or other candidates to boycott the election. The U.S. is afraid world opinion will view the Nicaraguan election as a fulfillment of the Sandinista pledge 5 years ago to return Nicaragua to democracy. The State Department published a special resource book to guide writers about the election away from such a conclusion. Since the Sandinistas are expected to win easily, the U.S. fears the election will legitimize the Marxist government which took power by force in 1979. So the Reagan administration is expected to keep the pressure on after the voting, calling for new democratic elections and continuing to support Nicaraguan Contras who want to overthrow the Sandinistas. Ralph Begleiter, CNN at the State Department.
Most parts of India seem to be returning to normal today, but the death toll is estimated at 900 after 4 days of anti-Sikh riots following Indira Gandhi's assassination. Although gutted Sikh homes and shops still smolder and the burnt-out wreckage of buses and taxis litter the streets in New Delhi, people are going about their business. The London Times reports as many as 6 minutes passed between the time Mrs. Gandhi was shot and her assassins were gunned down. Actor Peter Ustinov was waiting for Mrs. Gandhi for an interview when she was killed. He said officials asked him not to mention the second round of gunfire. He said they didn't want to give the impression they had exacted revenge. Secretary of State George Shultz made a surprise visit to the Soviet embassy while he was in India yesterday. CNN's John Lewis has more.
Shultz attended the funeral of slain Indian leader Indira Gandhi. That was not surprising. But the U.S. Secretary of State did spring a surprise shortly after the ritual Hindu cremation ceremony, an unscheduled meeting with Soviet Premier Tikhonov. Following up on President Reagan's recent overtures to Moscow, Shultz told the Soviet premier that it was Washington's desire to establish constructive relations between the two superpowers, a sentiment Tikhonov returned, according to the U.S. Secretary of State. But good intentions alone are still not enough. Shultz said the brief meeting with the Russian prime minister broke no ground, nor did it cool Washington's anger over a new spate of anti-American charges. Shultz said he most forcibly brought to Tikhonov's attention Soviet allegations that Washington is behind the violence that has shook India since Gandhi's assassination last Wednesday. John Lewis, CNN, New Delhi.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Ciao for now.